like a plate with no dots on top or bottom or anything. The dots of and these harakat, the first time that they were used were actually the dots that we know today. You know, on the back is at one at the bottom, on the two. These dots that we know, actually, when they first were used, they were first used to actually mean fatha, kasra, and so on. They were not meant the way they're meant, they're put today. So in other words, when they wanted to put a fatha, they put a dot on top. When they wanted to put a kasra, they put two dots at the bottom. When they wanted to use a dhamma, they put at the front. But they used dots for the fatha and kasra. There were no dots at that time. And so this is the time when, you know, Imam Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, this is one of the great persons that, you know, good to remember in our history. During the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu, Ali ibn Abi Talib gave him actually to the order to actually put these dots to indicate fatha, kasra, and dhamma. This was the very first thing that happened. And you can see, subhanallah, you know, these khulafa, each one of them had a role in this whole thing, the way we have the Quran. You know, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq with his decision at that time, and Umar ibn al-Khattab convincing him to do that. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq had to make the decision, and Uthman ibn Affan, his decision, and Ali ibn Abi Talib, you know, each one of them had a role in how we actually have the Quran today. Later on, during the time of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, this system was changed to actually say, because again, when, you know, when Islam kept on spreading more and more, even the dots that people wouldn't now understand, because there are some people that are non-Arab speakers, you know, they are, and so when they received it, when they see something like ya'malun, is it ya'malun or ta'malun? There are no dots. Or is it the two dots at the bottom or two dots at the on top? Which one is it? So because there was this confusion, so that's the time, during the time of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, he actually decided and said, in addition to those dots that were established to establish fatha and kasra, no, let's keep fatha and kasras, and then let's put dots to indicate the ta'malun from the ya'malun and so on. So it's by this time, by the time of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, where this whole thing was completed. Later on, then the signs of the waqf, where you would put, you have to stop at certain places, and some places you cannot stop. These waqf and ibtida, this thing later on came during the time of Imam Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Tayfur al-Sajawandi. This is later on, this whole thing came. And again, you can see the process. During the time of the Sahaba, they received it, they got it from the Prophet ﷺ directly. There was no need to go through this whole thing. But as Islam spread more and more, they needed more detail. And today, we have even the Tajweed being, you know, colored for us. And Allahu A'lam what will happen in the future. You know, you can see the process by which we have, you know, the Quran today. طيب, any question? I wanted to go through this because, you know, subhanAllah, there was so much effort that was put for us to receive the Quran the way it is. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for us. And here you are, you know, and here I am, somehow subhanAllah, it's good for us to have this kind of perception so that we're here to maintain this whole thing. So that we become, you know, a group of people, inshallah. You see, throughout the history of this whole thing, at any given point, there were a group of people that were always giving it from one group to another. It wasn't just individuals. It was a group to a group to a group. And we happen to be one of that group now, inshallah, that we're able to convey this Quran the way it was recited to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now we go, inshallah, into few terminologies, inshallah. This term, at-tartil, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرَتَّلْنَاهُ تَرْتِيلًا. See, this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He recites, when He says the words that we have this Quran, when we have, Allah subhanahu does not just qara'a, Allah does not just read the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way He says it is وَرَتَّلْنَاهُ تَرْتِيلًا. So what is this idea of tartil? And then telling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Then, and you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, recite it with tartil. So what is this tartil thing? And that's very important for us to understand. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here just doing tajweed and not tartil. The Ali radiallahu anhu, he says, when he was asked, what is tartil in those two ayat that were just revealed, he was asked, what does tartil mean? Ali ibn Abi Talib said, Tajweed al-huruf wa ma'rifat al-wuquf. Knowing the tajweed of the words, how to say each word, and understanding when to stop and when not to stop. That is tartil. And so, based on this, what we'll be doing throughout the series, inshallah, is Tajweed al-huruf and Ma'rifat al-wuquf. We're going to be doing these. When we talk about Tajweed al-huruf, okay, this is the first part. When we talk about Tajweed al-huruf, we're talking about two things. The tajweed, that is, one of them is knowing the makharij, knowing where does each letter, where is it supposed to be coming out? Because sometimes you would hear, for example, somebody wanting to say qa, but then saying qa, 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 because it's coming from the wrong place in the mouth. And so where does it come from? And then the qualities of that letter. Because I could say qa, but I could say qa, and they both come almost from the same place, but they have different attributes. So what are the appropriate attributes for each letter? Those two make what tajweed is. And so in essence, if we were to divide tajweed into these two, makharij, which is articulation of the sounds, and the qualities of the sounds, and that is tajweed, and that is tajweed, which is divided into the two parts, and then we have ma'rifat al-wuquf, which is when to stop. That's exactly what the series is. We're going to be doing 3 parts to this whole series, and that's what the 3 books are. One of them is talking about makharij, articulations of letters. The second is qualities of the letters, and the third one is knowing when to stop and when to start verses of the Quran. And that's kind of where we're heading. We're going to be starting with this makharij or the articulation of the letters, inshallah. Any questions before we proceed? Articulations, makharij al-huruf. Articulation, al-makharij, الqualities, الصفات, صفات الحروف, and معرفة الوقف والابتداء.
Can you tell me what qualities are again?
Qualities are the attributes.
Actually where it comes out from, it's not.
Yeah, the articulations, you mean? Yeah, the articulations is the position where it comes from. But there are times there are some qualities that are attributed to each one of these letters. It's like a second layer that you build to these letters. For example, there's a letter that would say ra, for example, would be ra, and there are times where you would say ri. They're both ra. Why is it sometimes ra? Why is it sometimes ri? Lam, for example, most of the time is la, but then there are times where you say la. Why is it like this? Why? So all of these different attributes that go into the letters, that's a very key component of tajweed. Any questions so far? طيب. When we do, anytime, it's very important for us to, we'll be doing this Quran thing throughout, inshallah, during the day and during the night, inshallah, as we practice much of this. There is this isti'adha, which is saying, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan ar-rajim, and basmalah, and say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In terms of just hukm here, when do we say isti'adha? Anytime you start. Anytime you start. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran said, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ. Anytime you read the Quran, قرأت, not necessarily رتلت. It doesn't have to be a tajweed mode. No. Anytime you read the Quran, you open, anytime you want to talk to somebody, and you want to kind of say a reference of a verse or so, say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, and then فإذا قرأت القرآن فاستعذ بالله. You have to say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم whenever you start. Now, let's say you start, but then there was kind of a pause in between or so, and then you want to restart. Do you have to say isti'adha? No. Unless it's a big pause. Unless you've quit whatever thing. So if you're in a dars, we said أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, and you continue then, and then later on you don't have to say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان, because you're in that same setting. But if you've changed your setting, and then you're coming back or so, let's say somebody was reciting something, and then you had to answer somebody, somebody knocked on the door, you had to talk to them for a while and then come back, then you have to say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, because the setting, and the scholars use that setting kind of thing as an indicator for us to know when to say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. How about Bismillah? Bismillah. When do we say Bismillah? Bismillah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say we're all here together and I'm starting, so I say the istihada and then she's gonna read. Does she have to say it because she's starting her own self? Or she just continues to read? Or just
Wallahi, that's a good question. I didn't think about that. Yeah. I don't want to.
each person has to say it?
Yeah, I have my inclination, but I don't want to give my opinion. Honestly, I do not know. I'll have to ask. Inshallah. Yeah. How about Basmala? It's probably in the books by the way, but I have to review. How about Basmala?
Is it like the start of a surah?
Yeah, the start of a surah. Yeah, so with isti'adha, it's the first time you're in that setting. You say A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem and then say, let's say Bismillah for a given surah. You go to another surah, you don't have to say A'udhu Billah. You have to say Bismillah. So it's at the beginning of every surah you have to say, except of course Surah Bara'ah, Surah At-Tawbah. That you do not have to say. We're okay with that?
Okay.
Now.
Like I would often read from Surah Al-Baqarah, the middle of Surah Al-Baqarah.
Yes.
They say A'udhu Billah,
طبعا.
Bismillah,
Yes.
Bismillah. Also.
Yes, Bismillah there, it doesn't have to be loud.
beginning.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be loud. You have the option of saying it, and you have the option of not saying it. You have the option as an option. But at the beginning of the surah, you have to say it. At the beginning of the surah. Because it's part of the revelation itself. But in the middle of the surah, yes. Go ahead, inshallah. Go ahead.
So I was also taught, like, if it's in the, like, you just open the Mus'haf to start reading. If it's something about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or
Very
something
good.
good, then
Jazakallah.
you do say it. But
Yes.
if it's, like,
Jazakallah.
about
Very good. And that's where it comes, that optional part. And you have to be, because the reason at the beginning of Surah Bara'ah, it's not, is because Surah Bara'ah, it starts with punishing, warning the kuffar with something. Because of that, the surah does not start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That is why the scholar said, anywhere in the Quran, if you're starting in the middle of any given surah, and it's talking about some kind of punishment or so, then you don't start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. But you would start it with others where there is, other than any kind of warning or punishment.
When you said there's an option,
Yes.
did you mean like to say it in your heart and loud, or say it or not say it?
Both.
And then you have to say it like, I'm just going to recite, like, Ayatul Kursi, because it starts with Allahu la ilaha.
Yes.
So you have to say it, no? Bismillah. You can't just say A'udhu Billah because it's like from the shaitan. Blah, blah.
Yeah, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir. And then you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
But like in this case, is it optional or you have to?
No, to my understanding, you don't have to. Wallahi, just to make sure, we'll verify. Again, I think these are very good details to, I don't want, from the reading that I have, and even Ayman Suwaid, if I'm not mistaken, he mentioned that you do not have to, but it's highly recommended. I mean, there is no reason not to say it. But would you be punished because of not saying it, or would there be a sin for not saying it? In the beginning of the Quran, you have to say it because that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have put it. But not for a beginning not in the middle of the surah. You don't have to, but certainly recommended. Yeah, I'm sorry?
You were still talking about
Bismillah. Yes. Again, just for detail purposes, I'm going to check for next time, inshallah, get back with you, just to make sure we're certain on that. But in terms of sequence, you don't have to say, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. You can say, so here are the different scenarios, if you will. You can say, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, stop. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, stop. And then the second, whatever surah that you're continuing. Or you can have, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. So you can have that kind of scenario. Another scenario would be, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And then you can. And then here, where you continue them all. Okay. So these are the different scenarios that because sometimes some people in different cultures they're used to do it in a certain way, and then once another person does it in a different way, people almost jump on them. So these are the the different scenarios.
They're all legitimate.
They're all legitimate. These are all correct. Yes.
And also, in Surah Al-Fatiha, the first ayah, it's Bismillah ar-Rahman. So let's
No.
say if you're saying in prayer,
Yes.
do you have to say Bismillah ar-Rahman in the beginning because it's a verse? Or do you have to... Do you say it
All
out
the
loud?
scholars, all of them, with no exception, indicated that you have to say it. All of them.
Okay.
The difference being, the only difference between them is, Ash-Shafi'i says you have to say it loud, while others would say no, you can keep it silent. That's where the difference is. But all of them, because it's part of the surah, all of them say that you have to say it on Al-Fatih. There are, this is, now we go into the Tajweed aspect, inshallah. In terms of style of recitation, there are actually 3 different styles of recitation. And in some books, they would divide this into actually 4. But for the most part, and even Ayman Suwaid goes into this, and he says there are 3 of them. There is what's called the Tahqiq style of recitation, or the Tadweer style of recitation, and the Hadr style of recitation. What these are, you know, the Arabic terms are not the key, is the pace by which it's recited. Tahqiq is from the term, you know, you're trying to get every letter very slowly. And this style is good for beginners. So for learners like you and me, we are trying to learn and making sure the makharij is proper, the attribute is proper. You want to do something like this, tahqiq. Otherwise, you're going to miss some of the details. When you become proficient, then you can kind of move into a faster pace. Hadr is very fast. Hadr is many times used in Ramadan kind of thing. You know, you don't want to do tahqiq in a Taraweeh. People will be really upset at you. So Hadr is very fast. You know, and of course there is a limit as to how fast you want to go, because you're going to lose some of the details. So unless you're an expert, because in all 3 styles you should not compromise the tajweed aspect. Keep that in mind. So we're not talking about going fast and losing some of the tajweed. No, in all aspects you have to keep the tajweed there. So the rules have to be maintained. It's just that if you're proficient and now your muscles are able to do these with even at a fast pace, maybe you can do that. But majority of the qira'at and the Prophet ﷺ was known actually to do tartil or tadweer. This was the recitation of the Prophet ﷺ. Yet the Sahaba radwanullah alayhim would say he was so clear in his recitation that we would notice letter by letter what he used to say. So when he says Alhamdulillah, we would know the ha and the lam, and it wasn't like Rabbil Alameen, Rabbil Alameen. Okay, where is the ayn here? It's almost fading out. It's almost lost. So the medium between the tahqiq and the hadr is this tadweer recitation, and that's kind of after, you know, a person becomes going from a learning phase into actually starting to lead salah and so on, you can actually start to do this level of recitation. It's important to notice these because when we do, if let's say some of us in this learning process now we're doing Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, the same thing I could say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and it's still, I'm able to maintain, but it's a little bit faster. And so when you do that later on, when we talk about the rules of tajweed and med and all of this, as in very nicely, the best that I have seen talk about this is Ayman Suwaid, actually very, very good, because he says that even the med, you know, the med will be extended based on your pace. Because when we say 4 haraka, it depends on how slow I am. The 4 that will go will be depending on what my pace was to begin with. So if I'm doing al-hadr kind of thing, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahman, and then when I say Waladdallin, the 6 that I go there are not the same as the one Waladdallin. That's a slower pace. So that you have to kind of watch, because it makes a lot of sense this way. Otherwise, you cannot just read too fast, and then when it comes to the mid, you'll do 1, 2, 3. It doesn't work like that. So, which makes a lot of sense. So, you have to pace yourself at one point and see kind of what your recitation is. But certainly, as beginners, this is the style you want to do, and that's inshallah. I'll almost force it on you. This is the one we'll be doing inshallah in our recitations. طيب. there are mistakes. This here is very important, this part here. There are two major types of mistakes when people do tajweed. First of all, before we go into this, what is the hukm of tajweed? Recitation of the Quran. What's the hukm? It's wajib. It's wajib. It's a requirement. Now, let's qualify something. Understanding the rules is fard kifaya. Understanding the rules. So if somebody could say, what kind of mad is that? Mad muttasil or mad munfasil? What type of mad? What type of extension is it? What's the attribute of this letter? Is it mufakham? I don't have to name it for you, as long as I'm able to rest. So understanding the rules is fard kifaya, meaning a group of the Muslims at one point in time, as long as they know it, that's good enough. But acting on it is a wajib on every Muslim. That's, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, very dangerous. And because majority of Muslims actually are not able to recite Quran in the proper way. When it's a wajib on every single person to actually recite in the way that it was actually revealed. Now in doing this, because people take that hukm and saying that, well, qira'ah is wajib, and so the moment we start to learn a little bit of tajweed, we almost start to point fingers. Oh, my sheikh, this sheikh, I thought he was good. I thought he was good, and now what happened? Apparently he's not that good. Please be careful. Once we go through this process, and you will see, through this process that we'll go through, we're going to be different, and some of you are going to be better than me in some of the qualities. It's a fact. This is not being humble. No, this whole thing, this mouth thing is all muscles, and how we train this muscle. There might be some aspect of that muscle that you are so good than me, and so it's about training. And so the students end up sometimes much better than teachers and their shuyukh and so on. So please, when we go through this whole process, the idea is not to start to say, you know what, Sheikh Abdul Basit has a lot of mistakes, or Al-Minshawi. That's not. The whole thing is, how can I get as good as I can be, and not. So be careful. I know a lot of people, the moment they start to learn tajweed, they start to say, I thought Yusuf was so good as Yusuf al-Daghushi or so, and he's really good, mashallah, tabarakallah. But you know what? The only one that is known even among the Sahaba to recite perfectly was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Sahaba were not all the same in terms of tajweed. They were not in terms of their recitation. There were differences in the way they recited. If these were the Sahaba, so how about us? So we're in this process of learning, and it's a matter of training that we'll go through. And so when we come to these mistakes, yes, the hukm is wajib, but there are actually two aspects to this. There is some aspect of it that are clear mistakes that we can't afford. The importance of this is, if somebody is to be asked to be leading a salah, you can't just say, you know what, out of humbleness, well, no, brother, you can go ahead. No, if we'll distinguish these two. If you know that person that's potentially going to lead the salah has these kind of errors, don't let them lead. You have to proceed. There is no humbleness in this. These are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And somebody is going to lead a group of people in salah. So make sure that if you know that the mistakes are more of this type and not of this, you go ahead. If you know your recitation is relatively better. If everything is equal, let everybody else lead. But what are these? These are mistakes in the way we say the words. So if somebody mixes the qaf with the kaf, the ha with the ha, these kind of things, this person should not be leading. These are clear mistakes on letters, on words, on tashkil, the vowels. If the kasra and the dhamma are not clear, so if mistakes like these, do not let a person, it's not about fighting, but at least be assertive and move forward in lead. But these are when it comes to rules of tajweed, mad, for example, tafkhim and tarqiq, meaning the elevated letters and non-elevated, the strong and the weak letters, and all of these we'll talk about when we talk about qualities. So when it comes to qualities and some of the rules of tajweed, it's not a big deal. It's inshallah the person would learn as we move on. But as long as the letters and the words and so on, the makharij are actually properly said, then you can actually allow if they are said properly, the person could lead salah. So these are two clear kind of mistakes that we need to kind of distinguish, especially that many of us are active Muslims and we're in the masajid or you're in your group or so, and people would sometimes go ahead, or others are there. So you need to be aware of these and make kind of instantaneous decisions, inshallah. Any questions on these? Oh, Bismillah. Oh, thank you. طيب. Let's go into now the depth of this, inshallah. What time is it? كم؟ 19. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نعم. يا الله يا رب. بسم الله. Inshallah, as we go into this in depth, Shaykh Uthman always tells me, my Shaykh, before I read Quran, he says, always make wudu. So when I was on the phone, I'm about to make tasmih, he tells me, Khalid, do you have wudu? So inshallah, I know there are times maybe wudu is not possible or so, but if at all possible, always inshallah. And I'm not talking about hukm here. I'm not talking about the ruling on something. It's just having kind of really living to the value of the Quran, inshallah azza wa jal. So inshallah, in these kind of gathering, many times inshallah we come a little bit early. If you don't have wudu, make sure you have wudu as we try to go into the depth of this. Now, we're going to start with this makharij al-huruf, the articulation points of that we have. And what do we mean by makharij? What we mean is the point from which a letter would actually exit. The moment it exits, that's the point where what we call the makhraj of that given letter. It's the point of exit. It's not the point of origin, it's the point of exit. Okay, so and basically the main point where when two bodies, if you will, it could be the tongue and the roof of the mouth, or when the two bodies collide and they produce some kind of sound, that point, that's a makhraj. If it's the nose that's producing it, that's a makhraj or an articulation point. Each letter in the Quran has an articulation point. And so what this means, this is very important. What this means is we are not here to properly read a surah, or properly read an ayah, or properly read a word. We are here to properly read each letter of the Quran. Each letter is a word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they come in different circumstances. Sometimes when it's in the middle of a word, it's more difficult. Sometimes at the beginning it's more difficult. Sometimes at the end it's more difficult. And so that's what we'll try to throughout this process, giving these different scenarios, inshallah. The technique by which you're able to actually say a given letter properly is always take whatever letter it is, there are all these letters that we have, put a fatha on top of it. It could be an alif before it, an alif with a fatha, or an alif with a kasra, or an alif with a dhamma. Most of the scholars, they use just an alif with a fatha. And then make the letter that you actually want to pronounce a sukun on it. So for example, I want to know how qaf is. Instead of just saying qaf, no, don't do that. The technique would be aqqa, tha, ath. I will put an alif with a fatha in front of it, and then the tha with the sukun, and then practice to know what the makhraj is. Because the letters are more evident when they have a sukun on them. Letters are more evident. That's where how you will know where the makhraj is. Okay? Ak, ar, am, at, ad, and so on. So that's kind of the technique that we'll do. So inshallah, what we'll do inshallah azza wa jal is the following. These are the different articulation points. And I'll send you these slides inshallah azza wa jal. There are 5 articulation points. And this is, when the Prophet ﷺ was reciting, he wouldn't tell them, the makhraj of this letter is the nose, or the makhraj of this. It never occurred like this. The Arabs, because of their that was their language, and so when they used to say the words, it just came natural to them. It's important to emphasize on this word natural, because we don't, sometimes in the process of trying to correct our recitation, we overcorrect. We don't want to overcorrect. We want to make it as natural as the Arabs at that time would actually recite. Okay, so in doing this, so inshallah, what I would like to go over are these 5 different articulation points. The first articulation point is what we call al-jawf. And al-jawf is the oral cavity and the throat cavity, which is this. This is the throat here, and this is the mouth. This is the tongue. And so this space here, plus all the way in, this whole thing, the throat cavity and the oral cavity, all of this here is called al-jawf. That's one articulation point. Okay. The second articulation point is the throat by itself. In other words, there are few letters that we'll see that will come out of this whole space, this oral and throat cavity. And there are some letters that will come from just the throat. And there are some letters that will come from the tongue as it hits different parts of this body here. There are some that will actually come from the lips. And there are some that will, there's a letter that will come, 2 of them that will come from the nasal cavity. These are the 5 different areas. And so in different parts of this, of the different letters, will for the throat, we'll talk about few letters. For this oral and throat cavity, we'll talk about different letters and so on. This is a model, just for you to kind of envision what we're talking about. So imagine with me, this is the tongue, of course. If this is the throat, so the throat cavity is here, and this is the oral cavity. So that's kind of the cavity that we're talking about. That's one of them. And this will be the throat. So you have the throat being one makhraj. The other one is the throat and the oral cavity. And then we have the tongue, which is this one here. And then we have the nasal cavity, which is supposed to be here. Okay. And finally we have the lips. Okay. So these are the different cavities. And so where, different areas, as we move on, inshallah, we'll be talking about the different aspects of the oral cavity and so on, inshallah. طيب. It's important for us to you can just, by the way, just, it doesn't bite. Sound production, question? Yes. No. Very good question. Each letter has a given articulation point. This guy is attentive, mashallah. But each letter has a given articulation point. But each point might have more than one letter that comes from it. Does that make sense? Very good. So the tongue, there are many letters that would come from the tongue. But at a given point of the tongue would always have one letter that comes from it, not more than one letter. And inshallah, we're going to kind of detail that. Sound production, this is very, very important. Okay, a lot of people, when they do letters, they mess up because of this simple mechanism, the physiology of how sounds are produced. Sound comes from our, from the lungs. They're produced from here. This is the throat cavity. And this is the oral cavity. And so naturally it would actually go this way. And because there is an opening here, this is the nasal cavity. And so air would come. So if I say, I actually feel it from my mouth and from my nose. And you would close this and say, I would just feel it from my nose. And if I say, it would just be from the mouth. So that's the proper sound production. Now, if I close, this is when we talk about the oral articulations in a little bit, we'll talk about that today, inshallah. When we talk about the letters that come from the oral cavity, everything is going to go through the mouth. So everything, you will see that this portion here would actually be sealing the passage to the nasal cavity, and so the whole thing would come this way. So if I do not properly position my mouth and I keep this thing open, the sound would be coming actually from both ends, which messes up the whole sound. Likewise, if the letter is meant to come from the nose, and I do not seal the mouth properly, then it's going to come from both ends, and so the sound that's supposed to be coming purely from the nose is mixed with one that comes from the mouth as well, and so it does not come properly. These are the things where I was saying earlier that it's all about muscles here, and how you train the muscles, and how you consciously make one more kind of superseding the others. Let's start with these, inshallah. Letters of the oral and throat cavity. There are, let me go back to this, maybe this will explain it a little bit better. This is the throat and this is the oral cavity. When we talk about these 5 different articulation points, the only one that the letters would come with a non-specific area. Non-specific. In other words, it goes, because we said this is the throat and oral cavity, and so it's this whole thing where the sound would continuously be produced from this whole thing, we call it non-specific. But when it comes to the tongue, when it hits a specific point here, it's a specific area. Or qaf, for example, somewhere here, or kaf somewhere here or so, because it hits a specific area, those are specific. So all these 2, 3, 4, and 5, all of these 4 are actually specific areas. But when it comes to the oral and throat cavity, it's non-specific. It's this whole area here. And that's kind of what we're talking about when we deal with this. There are 3 letters that actually come from that, from the oral and throat cavity. And we call them أحرف المد. These are the letters of mad. And how does a letter of mad be created? It's, as we know, it's an alif. It's a letter that is alif, which is a sukoon, preceded by a fatha. So for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says بحجارة, ja, which is a fatha, so